What's up, famzy? My name is Branzy, and welcome to the first and hopefully not last episode of the Build Along, where we're going to learn to become better builders together and build some pretty cool things just like this medieval swamp house you see behind me. So without further ado, let's get to work. So the first part of any build that I do is try to find a fun and cool area to build in, and I really liked this area of the swamp where it was a little bit higher than the other spots and it was right off the coast. It seemed like this would be a really cool place to put a build that was connected by a bridge, and that's exactly what this is going to do. So the first thing I'm doing on the actual build is going to outline it so I can get a better idea of where it's going to connect with the land later on. And you can see on the more round section of this is going to be where the tower is going to sit, and on the more square section is where the house portion of the build will be. Because it's going to be jutting out of the water, we need to start working on the foundation first. So I'm going to start with these little lines randomly around, and they're going to curve inwards and then poke back out right at the edge of the water so that we get this kind of more fantasy, unbalanced style of platform for this to sit on. And you can fill in all the gaps between those lines kind of randomly and sporadically to kind of get this more natural vibe and feel to the whole thing. But in any parts that look a little bit too flat or built man-made, we want to go ahead and carve some of that out. And it's the kind of thing you have to do a few times to really get good at it, and it's going to look a little bit thin in some spots from some angles, but I think overall this is going to be a really cool look to this whole thing, and it has a really cool shape to it. Next up is just some texture to the foundation. We've got some cobble coming in right now, and I'm going to use cobble for the main block here to kind of indicate some breaks and cracks within the foundation, but we also are going to put in some slabs and stairs in order to give it some roundness as well. And of course, because it's a swamp, we got to add the mossy versions of these blocks as well to make it look a little bit overgrown and a little bit gross, because what's a swamp without a little bit of gross? And now that we have the foundation pretty much figured out for the build, we want to add the foundation for the build itself. So I went ahead and put just a 3-high little stone foundation for the whole thing to sit on top of. And now what we're going to do is just add a little border of dark oak around the whole outside of where the build is going to sit. Now this is to kind of give a little bit more of that fantasy overhang style to it, but we have some more work to do as far as the build itself. So I added some corner pillars of dark oak and then filled in the middle with birch, and that's just to kind of have some really high contrast. I think it adds a lot of interest to your build. Now the roofs for this thing are gonna have some pretty high pitches. It's both the fantasy style and because I wanted to have this kind of witch's hat kind of vibe to the whole peaks of this thing. These are gonna peak up pretty high and kind of flatten out towards the bottom, and we'll use some trim later on to give it that flatness right at the edges as well. But for now, let's just fill in the whole entire roof all the way to the point where the tower is gonna meet up. And when we're looking at this tower, what I'm doing is I'm building the bottom of it first so I have a good foundation of the thickest part, but we want it to bow back in the center so it's a little bit skew-wampus and a little bit more fantasy style. So I'm going to build a smaller circle kind of in the center of it, and then I'm going to go up a few blocks and kind of look at the height of it, and if I like it, I'll go ahead and bevel it out right at the top again so that it has this thinner center, and we can of course go ahead and round out some of this and just to kind of get a better vibe of where this thing is heading and connect the roof to it so we can see how the whole build is coming along. And now we can go ahead and finish off these walls. I'm going to add a little bit of dark oak just on the edges to give it a little bit more detail on those trims at the top. And then I'm going to go through and add the trim to the bottom of these roofs as well. And I'm going to use a little bit of a variation style to give it a little bit of an up and down feel so it's not so flat and has a little bit more detail to it. And along those same lines, we're also going to add a second layer of trim on the inside of the whole area just to kind of give it a two-tone color and break up that high contrast between the birch and the dark oak. And we're also going to be adding these fantasy style roofs in as well to give them a little bit more curve at the top so that they're bowing inwards. Now that all that's taken care of, we can start working on the tower roof itself. I put a little trim at the top just to kind of give myself some space to work on, and then I went with this kind of same style of high pitch, and it's going to fan out at the bottom roof that we see in a lot of fantasy style builds, and also kind of trying to keep on track with the witch's hat theme that we have for our other roofs. And I think this whole thing has come together pretty well for the basic shape. But the tower still has a little bit of work to do on it as far as the shape, because there's too many straight horizontal lines in there. So I'm going to use some stairs and some slabs to kind of round out the bottoms of these window areas. And then I'm going to use the same kind of technique on the bottoms to make it look a little bit more naturally generated and match the bottom foundation as well. And seeing how that kind of flowed together, I went around and just added the same kind of structure and support to that overhang in some spots, but not the whole thing. So it still has that overhang feel, but it looks a little bit more supported. And to just kind of help that a little bit more, I also went ahead and added a little bit of trim to the bottoms of this thing, just to give it that structured feel and make it look like it was built into the actual foundation below it, rather than just sitting on top of it. Here you can see we're just adding some texture to the tower and the new rock that we added to the foundation. Again, cobble and mossy is a great choice for this area, but because this is the actual built part of the tower, I wanted to throw in some structure blocks such as the stone bricks and their mossy variants. And I think that kind of makes it seem like whoever built this tower found some gaps they needed to fill, and they had to bring in their own stone to do it. Now that we have the whole tower pretty much squared away here, I thought we needed to get some windows in here just to break up the monotony of the stone. And I went with some dark oak fences and some spruce to kind of frame those windows, and I think it turned out really, really cool. It adds a little bit of depth and detail to this whole tower, and I went ahead and used the same technique to get some dark oak shutters and some fences for structure around for the trim on the outside of the front of this build, as well as the sides, to kind of give the whole thing a little bit more of a theme and tie it together. And looking at the back of this, I decided that it was a little bit too flat and plain, so I decided to add a little balcony here just to take advantage of the beautiful sunsets that we get in this area. And of course, when you're building these balconies, I think it's important to have some structure to them, even if it is not really sensical. Having these little tiny wood pillars on the side here make it look like it's part of the build and built in. And now I'm just adding some windows to the top of the roofs to kind of break up the flatness and the black of the area. And I'm using some shroom lights, or you could use glowstone as well, to kind of emulate life and light on the inside as well, without actually having to have a building area in there. So I'm leaving a little bit of extra space on the side to be able to put in this chimney right here. And I didn't want to have a straight chimney. I thought it would be a little bit more fantasy style if it had a little bit of a curve to it and some kinks. And that's exactly what I was able to do with those stairs there. It adds this really cool shape to the whole chimney. And now I'm just going through and adding some texture with the birch planks within the birch wood itself, so that it kind of has this nice beat up look that we're kind of going for with the rest of the build. And of course, we can't just leave it at that. We have to add some texture to this black stone in the roof as well. It's pretty easy to do with either World Edit or by hand. It's kind of up to you. I use both techniques here, but I think when you do that, it really adds this kind of beat up look to the roof. And because of how we have the whole foundation and the rest of this build going so far, I think it matches a lot better. And so I'm just gonna go through and add some stairs and stuff just to kind of round out those harsh edges. And I think now we have a really good shape for that roof. And on the page of trying to tie this whole build together, I'm trying to really bring down all of these dark oak fences so that it looks, one, structured, but two, it breaks up that whole line that we have. Even with that trim, I felt like there was a little bit too much of a distinction between the stone layer and the wood layers above it. So with that, we can also go ahead and start hanging off some lights from these things as well, using some chains and some lanterns to kind of vary the length and height of the lights to give it a little bit more of a random feel. I think it really helped out and it brightened up this build a lot. And now that we have the whole build pretty much done, we need to get a way to it, right? And so I decided to go with a little bit of a rope bridge here. And I started with this kind of basic shape where it's not too steep and not too flat, and then cleared out some area right next to it so that we could work and make some paths to it as well. And now I'm kind of going through and deciding what kind of color and palette I want for this thing. I want it to be pretty broken up and tie in with the build as well as we can. And so I went with spruce and spruce trap doors, but I didn't want to have it completely straight. And so I've also decided to build this thing on a little bit of an angle. And then that's going to give us a little bit more interest in detail and give us some more opportunity to do some cool shapes with it as well. Using the dark oak fences, I felt like really tied in the bridge to the area and the build as well. But I still wasn't completely satisfied with it and how it was looking. And so I decided the next thing we needed to do was to add some trim to the whole thing. And so I went ahead and added some blackstone to it just to kind of blend it. And since we used so much blackstone on the roof of the build, I felt like this actually tied in really, really well. And because of the colors of swamps, it also kind of darkened that up and made it kind of just blend better. But I also went ahead and started breaking up some of the blackstone with some spruce trap doors and things as well. And I feel like that really made it a lot more rickety and a lot more interesting looking. Now it was time to start working on some paths for this build, and it wasn't anything too hard. I just used World Edit to do it because it's a lot faster. It's just pretty much path blocks and podzol with some coarse dirt. And on the edges, I'm using blackstone and some dark oak fences to kind of, again, blend in with the rest of the build and the area. And I think it turned out really, really cool with this kind of broken look. And then as kind of a last little detail, I decided to go ahead and just terraform the little lip where the bridge is sitting, just so it ties in with the whole area a little bit better and blends into the natural generation as well. And I'm really happy with how this thing has turned out, so much so that I think it's deserving of a little cinematic montage. I mean, it took a long time, but I am super, super proud of how this thing turned out. I think it looks really, really amazing. Obviously, there's no interior. We didn't do the interior for this thing just yet. Maybe we'll come back and do that at some point, but I think it looks really, really cool. I'm really happy with it. I really hope that you guys enjoyed today's video. I hope that you guys either learned something or just, enjoyed sitting back, relaxing, and kind of getting a look into the mind of Branzy and how I struggle along in building things. But that being said, guys, I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, be sure to let me know down below. You guys know what to do. If you have any suggestions or any kind of building tips or whatever we should build next, be sure to leave that in the comments as well. And as always, tune in for the next one.